Being live streamed. Okay, there we go. We are live.
Oh, it's all exciting now. I got this thing on, so all right.
Chat there. Okay.
Yep.
That was the first time last night I've stayed up till midnight in like years.
Yeah. Well, it was a long night. I think tonight's gonna be a long night too. I mean, well, potentially it all depends. But even getting back, that game's going to end around 9:30. By the time we get out of there, depending on what happens, it's going to be at 11:30 anyway. So yeah, it sucks, but whatever. It's a stupid thing here. Yeah, it's all right. Life would have been so much easier if things played itself out different last night, but well, that's the way it is. So anyway, but that's cool. So okay, but whatever. It's just aggravating more than anything. But whatever.
Well, now we can focus on the Civil War for a little bit.
Yeah, another one more day, and this stuff is over finally.
Anyway, good morning, Ryan. Good morning, Gentili. Happy first Liverpool match of the season.
I knew it was a special day, John. When I woke up, I knew there was like the birds were chirping louder, the sun seemed brighter. I didn't realize it was Liverpool's day. You know, may you never walk alone, John. That's the whole point. So anyway, it's the one soccer thing I know. Someone gave me a scarf, a Liverpool scarf. I probably should just give it to John next time I see him, but it's somebody guy I used to work with went over there to watch a soccer game, and he came back with a scarf, and he gave me a scarf. I'm like, okay, that's cool. It's just been sitting in the closet, so maybe I'll just give it to him. I don't know. Anyway,
good morning, Barbara.
Yeah, hey everybody, what's going on? What's happening?
We finally released our episode about Battle of the Crater. We wanted to get it out earlier, but just baseball and stuff. We're both involved with a baseball team, so we've been busy with that. But yeah, we released Battle of the Crater, and that was an interesting one to research. Horrific battle, admittedly. And we had Ledley and Ferrero on our front lawn last night for entertainment.
Yeah, it's always fun to come back to the house, and where we live is right on the main drag of the bars, and a lot of times on the weekends you get some drunken people leaving the bars. There was a couple of dudes kind of yelling at each other. It was pretty funny. It was kind of like watching Mary come out of the Union Cigar that night. That's how it is. But
anyway, it was like you said this morning, I'm like, well, I guess we had Ledley and Ferrero on our front lawn last night.
No, but I'm glad we finally did that. I mean, we wanted to do it last week, and we just the way life was, we didn't get a chance to do it.
Whatever. But yeah, and so I wanted to say this before we get too far. Well, I was going to mention it anyway, but Ferrero, I think he was the one that was the ballroom dancer, and he wrote a book about ballroom dancing. He taught dancing at West Point. So he's think of Dancing with the Stars. That's Ferrero, who is the guy that he is leading the USC teachers at the Battle of the Crater. Well, not really. He's in the bomb proof with Ledley getting banged up. But just learning he was a ballroom dancer instructor, because his dad, he was born in Spain, just like Meade was. And his parents were originally from Italy, and then they immigrated to the US, and his dad opened a ballroom.
Yeah, he was
New York, and then Ferrero takes it over, and like I said, writes a book about ballroom dancing. I find this so fascinating, kind of the other lives these guys led, kind of what's his face? Grierson is a music teacher.
Yeah.
The guy that leads Grierson's Raid is a music teacher. Scott just said, good morning. Just got my hands on Abner Small's diary. Darren was right about it being one of the best.
Oh, it is the best. But going back to Ferrero, he used to coin the phrase, at West Point, nobody puts William Beatty in the corner. That's where that came from. Anyway, yeah, but I know it's early, but yeah, no, I'm glad you like that book, Scott. I've said it before, that Abner Small diary, and Abner Small is an interesting fellow. He's a very opinionated fellow. Originally for the 3rd Maine, he was in charge of trying to be the guy to help recruit troops of the 3rd Maine, and he couldn't do it. He famously said that he would try to recruit underage boys to join, and someone said one of the fathers of the kids he was trying to recruit said, if you recruit my son, you, sir, will be the first casualty in this regiment. And so he had to stop doing that. And then you had Charles Tilden come along, and then but you know, he's not a big fan of your boy Howard, the Abner Smallmare. I'm going to tell you, he's not. He hates him. Matter of fact, he hates him.
No, he's not. Which is fine. I mean, each to their own. So Ryan said Farrow had a decent career up to the Crater, which is true. He led bravely and cleverly near Knoxville under Burnside there, but then at the Crater, he just like it kind of.
No, the Crater's a thing, and you know, people know about the Crater because it's like a Roadrunner cartoon. We're going to put the dynamite onto them, blow them up, and they're all going to run in. And on paper, you know, it's at first it sounds really silly. But then as they get into it, and what's interesting about this is you can really see a couple things change dynamically with U.S. Grant. You could see his motivation change from going to attacking Robert E. Lee to going back and fighting a geographical place in Petersburg. But when the whole thing falls apart, see, he really counted on Sheridan and Hancock at first deep bottom to take care of it across north of the James. And when that failed, he kind of did the well, that's not really what I meant to do anyway. What I really wanted to do was attack in the south, which was the B side, which was the afterthought. And people get that backwards because that's what Grant says. But if you read a lot of the contemporaries, are like, there's no way in hell the Crater was the primary attack. But it turned into that when the 27th, 28th, 29th went by. And Hancock and Sheridan couldn't do it. But what they did do successfully was drive men away north of the James River. So you only had really 4,400 men to defend that 16,000 against for Burnside's 9th Corps. So in that regard, it did work out well. But when the whole thing went to shit, when the thing blew up, it's really Ledlie, whether he either misinterpreted Burnside's orders or he just ignored them. But instead of running around the Crater to go to Wells Hill, they all stopped and stared.
Well, Ledlie wasn't there. That's the problem, is Ledlie is back in a bomb-proof, not leading his troops. So it's up to like the other guys there to kind of figure out, okay, what do we do? Oh, Ben says, good morning from Dallas. Ryan said there's a full chapter on a pharaoh in the Sons of Garibaldi in blue and gray. And just quick shout out to Lisa. She's on here right now saying good morning from Bel Air. She's giving a talk today at Tudor Hall. So good luck.
That's right. She is. So good.
We're gonna be there.
But I mean, Ledlie wasn't there, but William Bartlett and Elijah Marshall were those brigade commanders. And they talk about the orders we have are to go to the Crater and stop, which must have made no sense. But so that's why, even though Ledlie wasn't there, he was drinking rum in the bomb-proof. He with Farrow. But that's where those orders come from. And so who knows? I mean, who the hell knows? But it turned into a complete shit show, and it got really, really ugly. And it's as much as it's a fun battle to study when you're looking at the lead up to it. How how they dug through that the 48th Pennsylvania, how they were able to get there, to dig the mine, to get where they needed to be. Henry Pleasance, he's commanding a regiment from Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, which is where Pottsville is. If you know Yingling beer. And they're all miners for the most part, and they decide they're going to dig this mine. And the way they pull it off it's fantastic. That they dig a 510-foot 6-inch mine, just under 511 feet, that gets right under Elliott's salient, and they were able to get the gunpowder there. They were able to get the fuses, and they were able to pull it off. But really, it's once that went off was when everything went bad, and it turned into probably would have been Burnside's best moment in the Civil War, to the one that ultimately gets his ass fired.
I mean, he stumbles quite a bit. He's not Burnside, right? But I mean, there's stuff here that clearly Fredericksburg stays with him because they have to have supplies for the mine as well. And he goes to Pleasance, and Pleasance is like, well, there's an abandoned sawmill. Can we just chop down trees and use that as timber for the mine? Because Burnside was going to get it from Washington. And given the track record he has with Washington in getting supplies, he's like, yeah, you know what, fire up that sawmill and we'll use it, which is pretty good. Like there's a lot of like interesting and cool things that are happening because the Crater itself is a feat of engineering. I read a few articles that focus specifically on the engineering aspect of it, and people had questions like, is this going to happen? Like Meade's chief engineer is like, this is not going to work. He questions Pleasance, and Pleasance ended the meeting by saying, "I'll see you in hell." Oh,
Yeah,
thank
he
you.
calls
Frank
it.
just wished me a happy birthday.
Oh yeah, but his engineer calls it claptrap and nonsense.
Yeah.
And the big issue he had was how you're going to vent this thing.
Yeah.
And they came up with a really ingenious plan. Pleasance did to vent it, where about halfway through they dig a vertical trench into it and they light a fire in the bottom and they put some kind of grate over it, and the fire is going to push the air out. And they put some kind of I don't know, some kind of shaft type thing through the mine to the opening. So what you created was kind of a ventilation system that the fire moved the air, and so they were able to pull it off. I mean, the whole thing was done in about 4 weeks, working overnight. And some of the troops got mad because the troops who did the work were giving extra whiskey to get it done.
47th PA Burnside gave them, I think it was Burnside gave them extra whiskey.
Yeah,
they got pissed off about it. The one thing that I also meant to mention in the episode too, but I mean, we all had, like, you and I both had tons of notes on this, and you can't talk about everything. There's someone on here. Fourth Cut Productions says, "Good morning. It's great to be able to join you guys and go Born Braves." Thank you.
Yeah, well, I finish this up tonight, so better anyway.
But there was one, I think it might have been Pegram on the Confederate side. He was in the same class as Howard and SD Lee and Jeb Stewart, and that was going to be my random Howard reference.
Oh, well, you did mention that. Yeah, you mentioned that. But that's that's the way it was. But no, but I guess it was. But the what's the phrase I'm looking for? If you're looking for a hero in the Confederate side, it's definitely Billy Mahone with this. And Mahone, he's got David Weisiger, he's got John Sanders, he's got Matthew Hall, he's got those the Virginia, the Bamans, and the Georgians. Do you know there were Georgians at the mine? Do you know that?
I don't know where they at Gettysburg.
I don't think so. But but he ended up kind of having to rush back. He was kind of like when Lee realized what was going on, when he heard the boom go off.
Yeah,
he sent Mahone. And it's interesting when you look at chain of command. We talk about this a lot. AP Hill's in charge, followed by Richard Anderson.
Yeah,
Lee is going to give the orders directly to Mahone and bypass the chain of command 2 levels down. And it reminds me a lot of Longstreet at Gettysburg, and people talk about that a lot. But I think it just goes to show the urgency of it. And I think Lee realized he got caught with his knickers down, Mary.
Knickers down.
They were down to his brogans. And but I think what happened was it ends up rushing in a lot of those Virginians, those Bamans, and those Georgians to that spot to help fill the numbers. But what Burnside didn't realize, he thought behind the mine, it was an open field that went right up to Wells Hill. Yeah. What he didn't realize was apparently digging 24 hours of mine, that 138 yards from the Confederate line, they might have realized something was up. So they prepared, built bomb proofs, they did trenches. Yeah. They put artillery under James Haskell, Frank Huger's guys all around, 500 guns, 700, 500 yards away and 700 yards away. So they made that field look almost like a killing field, kind of like East Cemetery Hill at Gettysburg. Yeah. So once those troops would have got past there, they would have been subject to enfilade fire. Yeah. They would have had troops waiting for them in the trenches. So it wasn't as easy as they thought anyway. But Lee did take advantage of that time to help prepare in case something did happen. So
and I think it was Pegram who figured it out that they were up to something, and he was the one that did a lot of that. And once the Union is into the Confederate lines and digging basically underneath them, the Confederate guys start kind of countermining, and they're trying to find them, and they can hear each other. That must have been so creepy. It's like, we can hear them, but we don't know where they are. Yeah. So they knew. And another interesting aspect of this battle too is that, and it doesn't get talked about a lot, is Beauregard, or Beauregard as we call him, is there too. He's awakened by the explosion. And he's actually, there's one point where it's his guys. I think it's during the truce, right? When they have to have the truce to get the bodies, and it has to go to then Lee's like, no, this needs to go to Beauregard. These are his guys. You got to talk to him about it.
Yeah, that was kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of despite. Kind of a bitchy little move on Lee's part, because it was 105 degrees and there were dead bodies that were bloating, that were literally falling apart before these people's eyes. It was maggots. They talked about the guys digging the holes, and maggots are all the way up to their elbows. They had to shake them off. That's how bad it was. And when they go to put the truce in, they go to first, they want to do an informal truce. And of course, Lee says no, and that ain't going to happen. And then they finally agree to a formal truce. It goes to Lee and goes, "Oh, thank you very much, but you don't give this to me. Give this to Beauregard. He's in charge of that area."
Yeah.
That kills. Then Beauregard gets it late in the afternoon. He looks at it and goes, "Yeah, we're going to do it, but it's getting a little late. I think I want to
sleep.
Why don't we wait till tomorrow?" So finally, it's August 1st. They finally get out there, and these dead have been out there. And they were talking about these 8 to 10 bodies deep, stacked up. And as a matter of fact, if you go to the crater and you visit, there's a sign like one of those like those Civil War trail signs, but it's not them. It's like a park sign. And there's a picture that was probably taken about a week or two later, and you can see the civilians walking around the mine and checking it out. But if you look close, you can see skulls and bones that are still there. And the people who own that land at the turn of the century, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they would sell tickets to that. You could walk through the mine shaft. They had lights up there. You could buy tickets, but you could buy Union skulls that were made into ashtrays. They were selling at this place.
That's just like, I mean,
and they say Salem is commercialized, Mary.
Yeah.
But that's the truth though. And eventually the Park Service took it over, but it wasn't for years. I mean, if you go there now, you can still see the indentation where the explosion was.
Yeah.
But the mine's the cool part because you can see, and it dips. You can see where it's collapsed in a few places, but you can kind of follow the trail that they would have put in there. So Pleasant Skies had to dig that out, and even that's a cool story about how they had to reconnoiter that.
Yeah, the whole isn't that when he puts the burlap?
Yeah, I mean,
over himself
so Pleasance goes up there with an adjutant to go take a peek, and they're so close. The adjutant sticks his head up to look, and he gets shot in the head. Bang, gone. So he's like, "Well, this sucks. How the hell am I going to see where the hell we're going to dig this?" So he has a couple other adjutants go around to his right, to the right, and he puts their kepis on sticks and holds them up, and they start shooting at the kepis, kind of like Vicksburg. Yeah. But he puts a burlap sack over his head and cuts 2 holes in it. I told you it looks like Dumb Donald from the Fat Albert cartoon. And he's sneaking up with this, and he's able to look through the glasses. He's able to reconnoiter the land while they're shooting at the guy's kepis on the sticks. And so it's kind of a ballsy story. Henry Pleasance, you want to talk about the all brass balls team? You got to include him with Robert Smalls and Charles Tilden. You have Patty O'Rourke. You have to include him in this group because when the mine at 3:30 in the morning, when the mine doesn't explode, and they're all sitting there waiting, oh boy, this is going to be great. And I said in the episode, it was like Clark Griswold on Christmas Vacation.
He tries to turn the lights on,
and he turns it on, and nothing happens, and everyone's looking at him. He's like, fuck. And it's embarrassing. He's going to take 2 of his staffers to go into the mine to see why it didn't go off, knowing that at any second it could go off and they'd be vaporized. And they find that the fuse had burnt out, and they go to relight it, and guess what? They all forgot their matches.
Yeah.
So they had to go out again, come back in, light it, and then run like hell, kind of like those dudes in Animal House. And they left the bar in that scene. And then it finally goes off at 4:44 in the morning. One of the largest explosions to this date ever on U.S. soil. 8,000 pounds of black powder.
But boom. Burnside, didn't he want like 12?
He wanted 12, and the government sent him 8 because that's the way the government works.
And they sent him like fuses that would go out if they got wet.
He wanted waterproof fuses, and they sent him regular fuses. But that
is so typical bureaucracy.
Well, they were able to create 100-foot fuse by tying them all together.
Yeah.
And you can only imagine lighting and then running like hell to get out of there.
Yeah. I just feel bad for Burnside though, because he's had nothing but issues dealing with getting supplies, right? Going right back to Fredericksburg, right? Like that must have just been so infuriating.
What's sad about this whole thing is that people talk about the USCT guys. Yeah. You're talking about the Goddard Thomas and Joshua Siegfried's brigades and all those guys getting gunned down with 27th U.S. colors and all that stuff. But if this thing had worked and they could have got to Wells Hill and they would have split Lee's army in 2, that hill, they would have commanded the town of Petersburg. It would have made Petersburg fall. Richmond's unsustainable. That 10-month siege could have easily been avoided if this thing had gone. Now, admittedly, this was their 3rd offensive attempt here. This was their 3rd offensive. And you had the first couple fall apart. Gilmore screws up with the 10th Corps, and then Hancock screws up with the second one. And then you
Yeah,
have
Hancock's 1864, and admittedly, he's recovering from his injury. Like that was pretty horrific. That injury he got at Gettysburg. Hancock's 1864 is not that great. I know we talk a lot, joke around with MJ. And Hancock's still a great soldier. He's awesome. He's got
no,
like,
by
you know,
1860, by
war
1860,
is not
1864, Hancock is Willie Mays on the Mets. I mean, he is.
Yeah.
That's what he is. But you know, he still commands a presence. He still has it, but he's just not what he just wasn't. Anything after Gettysburg, I hate to say, he that's not who he was.
no.
But this was their third attempt, and their first attempt was their best shot. And it
Yeah.
all fell apart because of delays, and they wanted to wait for August Count's cavalry to get there. And of course, they got there late. And by the time they got there, Beauregard had strengthened because they were home guard defending Petersburg, young boys and old men, right?
Yeah.
And then by the time they go to finally get ready to attack, Beauregard has defended the line again. That Dimmock line is now defends it again.
Yeah, he does really well. No one talks much about how good he actually is at this point in the Civil War, but he's like that bullpen pitcher that is really good and never gets utilized properly and just keeps going from team to team to team, because it's not long after this that something goes down and he gets shipped off to the Western Theater again. And he's supposed to be Hood's boss, but not really. Hood is doing the whole like, well, I'm just going to take order from Richmond kind of thing. You taking a picture?
Yeah, I can send some, but it is interesting though when you look at how it was, and with any of these battles, there are so many missed opportunities that they had with this, and that's the real shame is when you think of that 10-month siege. I mean, it's sad, but this wasn't Grant's first attempt at blowing up. I mean, don't forget too, the 3rd Louisiana Verdun on Vicksburg. And so that was a very similar situation. No one talks about that because guess what? It's not the East, right? That's why. So they have some experience with this, and a lot of these campaigns, a lot of these battles it's the great what if, right? We talk about this all the time. But if they could have pulled this off and they could have got to Wells Hill and they could have split that army, the whole thing would have ended a lot sooner.
Yeah, that's one thing I read in a couple of articles, was that if the Crater had succeeded, the Civil War might have ended a little bit sooner. And the Crater was actually supposed to happen earlier, but guess what? You have the Battle of Monocacy happening midway through this as they're digging the mine. It's almost done when Monocacy is happening.
Well, that's the urgency by Grant, because he realizes I have to set my 6th Corps up now to defend Washington and Fort Stevens, the whole deal, because what Early's doing. So I've got less men. This thing, I have an opportunity here. So he figured, okay, Deep Bottom fell apart. So I have to do this. And as a matter of fact, when Grant is sitting with Meade, waiting for this thing to blow up, and it doesn't blow up. Imagine Meade's face, because Meade didn't. I mean, he wanted nothing to do with this freaking thing.
And it's weird.
Right?
We were talking about that yesterday, about how he's, there's some debate as to how supportive he was of his, but yet there's this letter written where he's basically like, it's kind of a thoughts and prayers letters, like saying like, you do you, Pleasance, and but it's like, I'll support you if I can, but he really doesn't. It's like Meade is very, I don't know how to describe him in the situation. There's a lot of, like you said, Monday morning quarterbacking going on with the Crater. And two, there's the inquest that is held afterwards, which is, I find it so odd. It's led by Hancock. Like, talk about a non-biased figure that you want, like, basically having an opinion on what happened here. And he just he blames Ledlie, he blames Ferrero, he blames like everybody.
He blames everyone except the Rosewoods clown. But the thing about it is you end up in a situation where Meade, who's kind of lukewarm to the entire plan, he finally, Grant's like, Burnside's all like, yay, explosion, fire, boom, right? And Grant's like, well, Deep Bottom fell apart. Let's light it up. And Meade's like, I don't know, Davey, right?
Oh no.
And so he finally does it, and they do it. And originally, when the conduct of the war committee happens, they're going to blame Ledlie. They're going to blame Burnside. Now they both get fired. They both get sent up the river, right? As far as militarily goes. But what happens? They end up blaming who? Meade for this.
Yeah.
Meade. So Ledlie and Burnside get exonerated, and George Meade, the guy who didn't even want to do it, he's the one who has to wear it.
Yeah.
And so he's probably like, shit, but that's how it was. And
yeah, and it seems really like, I mean, Meade by this point is probably just rolling his eyes. It's like, oh, this is like Gettysburg all over again. And of course, like, again, Hancock after Gettysburg is not very happy with George Meade, and he's not very happy with Howard because Hancock is getting no attention. Remember doesn't he move? Doesn't Hancock move because the Philadelphia papers are like, yay, Meade, and Hancock doesn't get a mention.
Does he moo like a cow? What?
Move.
Oh, move.
No, doesn't he isn't he living in Philadelphia?
So after the Battle of Gettysburg, Meade, obviously, Hancock gets hit in the hind, he gets hit with a sun don't shine. Okay.
Yeah.
And he ends up going to rehab in Philly. He's from Norristown, which is not Philly.
Yeah.
Sometimes people can be a little away, but he goes to Philly. And while he's in Philly and he's waiting for medical attention that he finally ultimately gets, he's hearing in the papers all about the great George Meade, because Meade's from Philly, about how wonderful it is. And you think that, just how they talk about him. And he's sitting there and he's like, he starts to get a little butthurt. Yeah. Now he's butthurt literally and figuratively. And so he gets shipped out to Norristown to get his medical attention because that's how it was. And a lot of, and that's a lot of the stuff is, is ego with a lot of these guys. And you see it throughout it. They're the same people as we are today. And everybody wants credit for what they do right. And if something goes wrong, they want to, Colonel Clinket and say, I don't know what you're talking about. But but that's true though. Yeah, he did. He never really recovered from that. He obviously, people talk about his shitty situation at Ream Station in Petersburg, but really the second offensive at Petersburg is probably worse because he gets there and he has no idea what his plans are.
No.
And he decides to fall. Gilmore, whatever your plans are, roll with it, go with it.
Yeah.
And the whole thing, of course, falls apart again. And he doesn't really take command. I think that had happened a year before. And I like Hancock. Don't get me wrong. I think if it happens a year before, and he's got a little more piss and vinegar in him, I think he maybe he's a little more aggressive. But
I think too, it goes back to the fact that he's had a very horrific injury, and these injuries could affect these guys differently. You especially see it with John Bell Hood. I mean,
and Hancock didn't exactly have a great day over at Spotsylvania either. So really, anything from that date is you have to you can kind of see it, but that's the truth though. But the whole thing with the Petersburg offenses is there were 3 opportunities to avoid the siege.
Yeah.
Right. 18,000 people are living in Petersburg. They're the ones who are going to get ultimately punished for all this at the end of the day. And then when it finally does fall, and then it leads to the Appomattox campaign, that could have happened a lot sooner. And you had a lot of Confederates, the army, they were starving because don't forget too, Fort Fisher's going to fall, Mobile's fallen. So they're being starved out. Not to mention old Uncle Blingy's coming around the Savannah now.
Yeah.
Trying to close up the gap there. So you can see everything going on. So when you look at that whole picture, you can see why he threw that Hail Mary of Monocacy with Jubal Early.
Oh yeah.
And sent John McCausland out with his matches to light up everything in his way too. Because I think that's kind of what they had no choice to do.
Yeah. At this point in 1864 in the Western Theater, you have Sherman bearing down on Atlanta. And it's now to the point the Battle of Atlanta has happened. And it's basically Hood and Sherman they're staring at each other for a few weeks, right? And this is also, don't the letters start flying between them too around this time where they're like blaming each other?
Well, the blame game is the whole part of it. I mean,
that was great. Like Hood's like, could you not fire on the citizens of Atlanta? And then Sherman's like, you didn't just say that because you've launched a lot of those yourself. And they just start going back and forth. And then Sherman has that brilliant letter he writes to the mayor of Atlanta, basically saying like, once I'm in here and you stop fighting and surrender, I will help you out. I will give your citizens all you need. Until then, we're at war right now. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the city. And the other thing that's factoring into all this is politically, you have the 1864 election as well, which is huge.
Well, that's a big reason why Meade put the kibosh on sending in Ferrero's troops at the beginning of the crater. Because he didn't want in an election year to send, which is right around the corner at this point, to send a bunch of black troops in, which would be could be looked at as cannon fodder. Yeah. And to send in the other ones, Potter and Wilcox and Ledlie afterwards. and because how that would play in the north. And so that's why Meade gets hit for the conduct of war. That's what gets him. Is you had everything set up to send in Edward Ferrero. They were going to be the initial vanguard.
Those troops
right?
had trained for it. They knew the plan.
And they were green though. And they wouldn't do this is not the 54th Mass here.
No.
You're talking about people like the 19th color, the 23rd color.
Yeah.
These are new troops for the most part. They're going to have to attack, but when Meade, the last minute, we're talking 24 hours before the 29th, he says he calls an audible at the line of scrimmage and says, no way. He says it's impolitic to send them the USCTs. So now it ends up with really what Burnside really fucks up is he has to decide now between Ledlie, Potter, and Wilcox. Instead of picking the strongest guy, he literally hasn't picked straws.
Yeah.
And so Ledlie, who gets it, who was, like I said, he's a complete incompetent. Grant calls him basically, if you read his memoirs, completely incompetent. This is a guy, he was not a West Pointer. He's just here for the votes.
No. Well, it's questionable where he went to school, right? Like he said, I went here, and the school's like, we don't have any record of you being
Well,
here.
he didn't go to West Point. He went to a college called Union College up in New York State. And good hockey program, by the way, to this day, Union. They won a national title in 2014. Anyway, what happened was he says he went to Union, and the Union says, we have no record of your existence. So okay. Maybe he sang for Milli Vanilli too.
Oh God.
But what happened was he ends up, he's an engineer, he's a civil engineer, and he's by all accounts, he's pretty good at it. Ends up working for the railroad after the military. But he ends up really seeing his first action at the Battle of North Anna. So this is post Cold Harbor, and he's going to rise up because Thomas Stevenson, a good Massachusetts man, he takes one in the squash and gets killed, and now Ledlie is going to climb up the ranks, and he's going to end up taking that division, and he's going to have those brigades with Bartlett, Marshall, and he's, by all accounts, he's a drunk, he's a coward. He basically got the job by lying on his resume, and now he has to do the damn job. And he gets this gig 24 hours before, and he gets
the short straw.
Because he drew the short straw, and he has to formulate the game plan. And in his mind, the plan is to go to the crater and stop and not get through it. And that's the $1 million question with this is who told him to not pursue and get to Wells Hill, which is what everybody said they needed to get to. But they literally got to the crater and they stopped. As a matter of fact, they helped tend to the injured Confederates, but they stood around there and stared. And by doing that, you allowed Mahone to come down and help fortify those ravines. And so they did finally get a chance to go through. They didn't get anywhere. And it allowed Lee to push forward with an offensive, two offensive counterattacks. Don't forget, too, he couldn't do a counteroffensive at Cold Harbor. He didn't have the men.
No.
So now he's going to have to do a counteroffensive with Mahone, with Weizsäcker and Sanders, when he doesn't have that many guys, but he has those ravines, and he's able to use them to his advantage. And because of that, they were able to stop them and then use that crater as their own defenses for future attacks. So you couldn't ask. That's why Grant called it a stupendous failure.
Yeah.
That's no hyperbole.
No, it's really bad. And I mean, this is not a case of scapegoating. This is a case where he's not up front leading his men. He's in a bomb-proof getting drunk. And this is not one of these like, oh, he was drunk like Hooker at Chancellorsville when Hooker was really concussed. This is Ledlie and Ferrero were both banged up on rum.
But even Bartlett and Marshall, they weren't up front either. They got their asses captured.
Well,
they finally came up. They finally came up and they both got captured.
Yeah.
And first, when you look at how the whole thing goes with Weizsäcker and Matthew Hall, Hall has got Ambrose Wright's old brigade, and Weizsäcker has Mahone's brigade. Mahone's been promoted up now. So now Mahone's brigade is now in control by Weizsäcker. He gets wounded here.
Yeah.
That first offensive doesn't really go anywhere. They get they pretty much capture the north part of the crater area, but not the crater. It's Colonel Sanders, like we said before. He ain't no chicken, Mary. Colonel Sanders, right? There's a restaurant for him in Gettysburg honoring him, by the way, right on Steinwehr. You can go there and go check it out. But Colonel Sanders, guys, he's Alabama's the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, and the 14th Alabama. Those are the guys who are able to really push back. And those are the guys who do most of the racial attacks in the crater Middle East.
Yeah, that's the other side to this. That is really, there's more that talks about just what a debacle it is, or the engineering, that side of it. There's not a lot that gets into how racially driven some of this horrific fighting becomes. And
Yeah.
it's a really, it's like the New York City draft riots. It's a
I
perfect.
think it's way worse than that.
Oh, it is. No, but I'm saying there's a lot of racial stuff going on in it. And it's especially bad because it's 1864. And the casualties, the African-American casualties, are very, very high at this battle.
No, it's the 31% casualties.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. I mean, especially when you consider most of them were killed because they couldn't, when they would try to surrender, they were shot down. There were times when they were captured, they were leading to the back of the Confederate line. They were put on the side of the road, shot and gunned down the side of the road. That's cold-blooded murder.
Yeah.
And a lot of the guys they talked about, you mentioned Pegram. He talked about it. He says, we're following orders here. And when you read some of the accounts, there's a guy named Matthew Love, the 25th Mississippi. He talks about how vicious it was, how they would shoot them until they got close enough to bayonet them. Yeah. And then the officers would basically tell them, guys like William Mordecai, okay, he was with the 8th Alabama. He's telling them, guys, calm the fuck, stop it. And the men were like animals. They were bayonet.
Mahone was doing that
the dead.
Yeah, Mahone was doing that as well. He was saying stop kind of thing.
Yeah, and they couldn't stop it. Now the difference, the racial component's brutal. Now,
that's what Gentile just said. He said it was really tough to listen to.
But to make your comparison of the New York draft riots, which is a good one, that takes place in the North. But that was more economically driven by the Irish. Versus this was pure hatred, basically saying our slaves are attacking us. Our slaves killed our men with a friggin' bomb.
Yeah.
And that's what it was all fed into. And, we talked about a few of the stories in the episode, but for everyone we read, there's 5 we didn't.
Yeah.
Because it's overkill, but they are very, very difficult to read.
It's a horrific.
If you've ever seen the movie The Purge, right? It's kind of like that, where they're just hunting down people, and these people on their knees begging to surrender. They're being shot in the head, gunned down, and then bayoneted and mutilated. Yeah. They were when they were digging up the bodies, when they were digging to bury them, they had to use a shovel because the bodies were in pieces. They had to pick them up. I mean, this is. I mean,
and it shows the tone of the war in 1864 at this time. It's brutal. It's very brutal, because I think both sides know they're getting close to the end. There has to be an end point with this. And you see things like this happen in 1864 quite a bit. The Crater is probably the worst one, but you also have like Fort Pillow happening. On the north side, you have Ebenezer Creek, which again, it is a thing. It is a component of Sherman's march that does not get talked about a lot. And it's something that, Jefferson C. Davis, General Reb, as he's called, he doesn't really, I don't think he really has to answer for it, and it's one of those things where it's like, holy, Howard mentions it briefly in his memoirs. He said he remembers some of them running towards his guys to get away from it. But it is a really horrific thing that happens on the March to the Sea that Sherman kind of glosses over it, which is per Sherman, with things that he doesn't want to talk about that are not.
Yeah, it's tough, because I mean, this racism it's even to this day is everywhere. It's not, it knows no boundaries, north, south, west, or east. It just is what it is. But I think when you look at the fact that you had white Union men in the Crater too, also shooting the blacks, because they were afraid that guilt by association, that if they if they be gunned down to not be allowed to surrender too. The ones, and what was a real dark part of this too, is they did capture a handful of them to bring back to Petersburg to put through this type of parade.
I mentioned before. Or was it A.P. Hill?
He was a big part of it. 18,000 civilians in the town. They captured, I don't know what the exact number was, but they captured quite a bit of blacks and whites together, and they marched them up and down the town, and they mixed them so they can show the Petersburg residents what race mixing looks like, and this is what we're fighting for. And it's really you talk about the battles, you talk about Gettysburg and Antietam and all the flag bearers, all this stuff you talk about, but the personal type of real anger and hatred that's goes on that was gone. And if you look, when you look under the skirt at some of these battles and
Yeah.
understand, it's really tough to read. And that's
Yeah,
why
it's
and that's why the diaries, he mentioned the Abner Small diary, and you get a real personal feeling of what these guys felt at the time. And that's why read Small, read Chestnut, read Wainwright, read these diaries, read Company H, read this before you read Coddington and Sears, because those books tell a story from a high level down. The diaries from the grassroots up, and it's so much more personal and easier to read if you do that. But I'm glad people read the Abner Small diary.
Yeah, that's cool. There's been a few people that have chimed in the last few weeks and mentioned they're reading it. Frank mentions the book Fighting Means Killing has a chapter on the killing of USCT soldiers trying to surrender at the crater and how the white troops also shot them down. We did have a question on our Facebook page about any books about the crater, so that's one that has a chapter in it. I know there's been a book recently come out in the last few years, which is a series of essays about the siege of Petersburg, and it's got 2 chapters on the crater, and one of them is about the crater in in fiction. One
book that, if you want to read some of these stories, these soldier stories about this, is Peter Carmichael's War for the Common Soldier.
Yes,
Dr. Pizza, he's a friend of ours, he's a good dude. He wrote a book that's really on the he talks all about the Futch brothers, but that's just one chapter. He has stories, and a lot of the stories we talked about in the episode came from Pete's book, because you're getting a real firsthand account of the stuff that was written and how they felt. And some of the stuff's tough to read. You read it with with a tainted eye sometimes. But
I mean, history. There are parts of history that should make you uncomfortable. That's part of studying history, and you have to study it to understand fully what's going on. You can't just look at the battle tactics or the logistics. You have to look at what's going on behind the scenes. You have to study the racial side of the crater, the racial side of the March to the Sea, specifically Ebenezer Creek. And you have to study the New York City draft riots to see what's going on the home front. Oh, good morning, Elsie. Elsie's on here. He sent us a picture of him drinking Narragansett last night.
Oh, Spanish ladies. Oh, ladies
Robert Todd's
of
birthday
Spain.
The other day.
It was. And not the guy from 54th Mass.
The actor from Jaws. Then Lynn says good morning and happy belated birthday.
Yeah.
Well, and then Gentili mentions that his favorite restaurant in Gettysburg is Buster's.
In honor of Shaw.
Yep, nice.
Right. Buster's. There needs to be a bar, and John Gentili, I think he's gonna do this when he finally gets his ass a house in Gettysburg. We got to open a bar called Buster's Armpit.
Yeah.
Right.
It sounds like it would be competition with the Mine. It sounds like it would be like this dive bar.
I can see it now. All the soccer games will be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. John will be there all fired up.
Yeah.
But that's but it's true though, is when you look at some of this stuff, the soldier stuff, and these guys, as much as you think about this, like, how the hell can you do all this stuff? This was the marching orders. This was the stuff, the no quarter given, right? And by that point, people, you can't underestimate how much the Emancipation Proclamation pissed people off.
It did.
North and South.
Oh, on both sides. Yeah, definitely on both sides. Like it did. You see it with the New York City draft riots. And even like, you think of someone like John Reynolds he's not an abolitionist. And I don't think he really agreed with what was going on. I think Meade is kind of lukewarm on it.
They just wanted to keep the country together, and they didn't care how to do it. And in a perfect world, obviously the Rebs never would have fired or forced something. There would have been a status quo. Reynolds had a history with slavery, certainly. Yeah. Sherman was by no means a fan of the blacks.
Sherman is somebody that it doesn't get talked enough about that through his whole life. And I still love to study Sherman, but throughout his whole life, he is he's like Tupelo early. He's a hardcore racist, and he never really changes his opinion. He gives Howard shit for being on the Freedmen's Bureau and say this is not the way to be in the Army. But give Howard credit; he never backs off of his how he's an abolitionist. And he and Sherman, they clashed over that. Sherman wrote in that thoughts and prayers letters.
Yeah, some of the accounts. Some of the accounts before. I assume that a guy like a Hancock had no problem with blacks and whites together. You always got the marble twist of Mr. G, so he must have been okay with blacks and whites.
MJ just
Oh, hey,
popped
hey,
on
hey,
there.
MJ, how are you? I didn't see you on there.
RKO. Frank mentions that he's reading Pete Carmichael's book, which is called War for the Common Soldier.
War for the Common Soldier.
Yeah, and he said he could vouch some of those soldiers left eye-opening letters, including John Futch.
Yeah, I mean, the Futch thing, who the hell was it? Was it Elsie who went down and found the location of where he was killed?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it was. But I mean, the Futch story is really, really neat because it talked about really desertion afterwards and how the Confederacy dealt with that. But I mean, a lot of these cases, you're talking just straight up murder, right?
Mhm.
And when we talked a lot of detail about a lot of these battles, and one of the Confederates, one of the Alabamans under Colonel Sanders, he talked about how the fighting was worse there, the hand-to-hand fighting, than it was at Spotsylvania at the Mule Shoe.
Yeah.
And by then it was military on military, whites on whites, it was just fighting. But with this one, it turned into, and they talked about how fired up and motivated they were, these soldiers from the Georgias and Virginias and the Alabamans, when they found out they were going to get to fight black soldiers. It was like waving a red flag in front of a bull.
Yeah, that was one of the quotes. And the other one that talked about it too was E.P. Alexander. He talks a lot about it as well. I had some quote. We talked about some of the stuff that his opinion on it and all that, but it is not something. I mean, the emancipation is not popular, definitely not popular in the South, but it's also not popular in the North.
No, because in the North, it represented, a hit to the paycheck, especially in cities like New York and Boston.
Well, you see it in the movie Lincoln with Fernando Wood, how against Fernando Wood.
That's over dramatized. I mean, the Fernando Wood thing is Fernando Wood's real issue. He's the mayor of New York City before he went into Congress, but his whole thing was it was more economic driven. That the Civil War, because New York City was a huge importer of cotton, and he wanted to cede from the country, make a free city, because economically they were being suffocated. His issue wasn't so much race as it was economy, and that's how he saw it. I mean, he was no picnic either with the race thing, but I mean, his issue was more on the economic side. But some of the guys, it was guys like William Barksdale, guys like Jubal Early, people like that. It was a lot different.
Yeah, and
they took the Emancipation Proclamation personally.
Yeah,
like this was a culture change now. And you talked about, when we mentioned a little bit ago, the Futch letters, how Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis were talking about, if we don't stop this, we're going to have mixed marriages and half black, half white children. And this is going to be our future. They were playing the race card. And that's exactly what they were doing, which led a lot to this. And so by the time something like the Crater happens, you can only imagine how fired up these guys were.
Oh, they were, like you said, that one quote we had in the episode, it was like waving a red flag at a bull. That's how fired up they got. Gentili mentioned Jersey was like that too with the economy.
Yeah, but Snooki took care of that, though. She took care of it. Yeah, those housewives, they took care of the economy. But that's the truth. A lot of the northern cities, we talk about Maine, speaking of Charles Tilden, when the economy collapsed, when that boat sank and all the gold disappeared, they went through a real tough financial time in Maine, but they supplied a lot of the fish to the South to use to feed the plantation. So they had an economic stake in it too. There's no surprise that Maine had a big copperhead population.
Yeah.
It really did.
So did New York State. Elsie said cotton is summer dollars for New York City.
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it.
And, Jaws Civil War reference.
Oh, yeah. Tell you about it. Mayor Vaughn, we can,
You mentioned him in who was he in the last episode? New York City draft riots.
It's like you yell states' rights, nothing. You yell emancipation. Now we got a situation in our hands.
That's actually
you've got a problem on the 4th of July. But that's
I've mentioned too in one episode, this is in one of our early ones, I mentioned that I did the Barracuda quote and you were like, what are you talking about?
Oh, I know what it meant. I know what you're talking about.
Like you yell Barracuda, you yell shark. We got a panic on our hands.
We got a pandemic on the 4th. We got a problem on the 4th of July. Yeah, but that's the thing though, is at the end of the day, and we talked a lot about why certain states like Kentucky didn't secede because
Mhm.
they were tied economically to the Ohio River in Ohio. So
Yeah, but Kentucky was interesting because geographically, it's like there's different things going on. Like you have kind of the part of Kentucky, the southern part that is closer to the south.
mhm.
Its geography is different than the north part of it,
Of course, yeah,
tied more.
absolutely.
So in the south of Kentucky, you have more slavery because you have tobacco crops there, and that is a really like tobacco is like requires some hard labor to grow. Whereas in the north, you have it more the industrial economy, so they're
Yeah.
not as tied to that slave economy. So of course they're going to be like, well, we really don't care, like we can stay in the union kind of thing. But like, you know, Kentucky is, we've done episodes about it. Like you have the Battle of Richmond, that's where Claiborne gets wounded. You have Bragg doing his offensive into there, and it's all like Bragg. The hilarious thing is Bragg being Bragg, he goes into Kentucky and he's like, I'm gonna get so many people recruited into the army, and nobody joins.
Yeah, well, that's I mean, people for the most part. I mean, Northern Kentucky. By the way, speaking of Northern Kentucky, Covington, which is just outside of Cincinnati, it's one of the best bar towns in America.
Oh yeah,
Mainstrasse,
I love Covington. Yeah,
that's a very underrated little bar town right there.
that's where there is a brewery called Braxton, and I
Yeah.
remember being at Liquor Barn in Kentucky, which is like amazing place. I had no idea Braxton Brewing Company existed. I bought it 100% because of the name and because I was heading down to Chickamauga.
Mhm.
And I was like, this beer could be shit, but it wasn't. It was surprisingly good.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it was, but it's a good
Really,
little
really
place.
good.
But economics drives it. But when you talk about the creator, it was not economics. It was just pure racial hatred. It really, really was.
Yeah.
And you know, and so a lot of these brigadier generals, I mean, guys like Matthew Hall and guys like David Weizsäcker and John Sanders, especially, you know, they all had taken over not too long ago. I mean, you're talking before, you know, Weizsäcker had taken over for Mahone, Hall had taken over for Ambrose Wright,
Yeah.
and Sanders had taken over for the great Cadmus Wilcox Mary. So these are all, you know, famous Gettysburg names, right? Under Richard Anderson's division now. And so everything gets moved up with you know, with the Wilderness, with Longstreet being heard, everything gets shifted. So you got these guys who are just taking orders and going forward and doing it. But even they thought it was excessive. There were in defense to some of the Confederates, there were some who were sickened by what they saw and they wrote about it.
Yeah, Mahone was, obviously on both sides too, just like you have on both sides a lot of racism. You also have people in the South that are not, that are sickened by what they see, that don't agree with it. You know, it goes both ways, and that's the thing. That's why you have to study both sides of the Civil War, and you can't say that the North is all pure and good, and you can't say that the South is wholly evil. And
no, people suck overall. I mean, this is
yeah,
and that's
but I mean,
exactly
the thing is, it's like
news,
it's very. Oh, hey, Amanda. Amanda's like, but you can't get Malort there.
Oh my Lord,
Maybe Ledley was getting banged up on Malort.
I like to think he's a little better than that.
Who knows? But, you know, maybe after enough rum.
Although Ledley was from Utica, so he's probably a Bills fan. So he probably didn't know any better anyway. Probably drinking to deal with the pain. I'm surprised he didn't send his men wide right instead of right, actually. But that's another story. But anyway, yeah, we're going to be going to Chicago next summer, Mary. We're gonna hang out with the men. We're gonna drink some
that'll be fun.
Where do you get a hold of that stuff? You're gonna love it. You're gonna drink it like it's water. It's great.
Doesn't it taste like cough syrup?
It's indescribable, but you know what? I'm gonna spoil a surprise. You're gonna have it. Anybody's been to Chicago has Malort. But no, but these guys, don't forget William Mahone. I mean, he didn't exactly cover himself in glory at Gettysburg, right? No. He was going to be one of those next in that echelon attack next to Ambrose Wright, and it never really happened. So he's in charge of a division, so he wants to, it wasn't just for that reason, but you want to do well. But a guy like him, I mean, he had some, Richard Anderson, especially Ambrose Wright, had real issues with him after Gettysburg. Ambrose Wright hated everybody after Gettysburg. Lane, all of them. He just, because he felt that he was left, holding his diaper in the rain, wherever the hell he actually got, because there wasn't any support.
Elsie said Malort is gasoline.
Yeah, I've had worse though. I had that jelly donut beer that time.
Which you had two of them and drank it and bitched the entire time, which was great.
I had to. No soldier left behind. You can't start a beer not finish.
You let me dump out a beer from Canada that was disgusting. Because
you wouldn't stop complaining.
You took a sip and said, yes, dump it out.
Yeah, it sucked, but you're like, but you gotta finish all your beers. But yeah, but that's the truth though. But yeah, as you study these, you definitely see a different thing. But you can see, you mentioned before, this is getting very late now in the war. I mean, they don't know what's going to end in 1865 exactly when, but they know for the most part. They know Grant is all around them. Sherman's coming. You have all the armies all moving in unison to try to end this whole thing. So they knew that the numbers were down. They know that the food was running out, that the blockade runners weren't getting through anymore. So they knew the timing was up on this. So it just turned into a, smoke if you got him situation. It just turned into pure killing.
Yeah.
Is what it, you know.
Yeah. That wasn't the beer, that was the maple syrup.
Some of the stuff you've drank has been not good that you've liked to.
No, I know. There was a maple syrup beer we had.
Oh yeah,
there's like coffee maple syrup.
This bacon beer that's actually halfway decent.
Yeah,
that's pretty good. People try to get a little too creative with this stuff.
Paul's wondering if we ever tried the fortune cookie beer that Appalachian Brewing Company had about 5
Yeah,
years ago.
I had it. It was okay.
Yeah, it was.
I find ABC beer for the most part all kind of taste similar. It's got a little twist here and there. I like ABC, but it's not my favorite. I am definitely a Fourscore guy.
No, I love Fourscore, but I also love ABC too because they've also got great food there too. So the Civil War.
Yeah.
Get sidetracked. Elsie said the crater was around 200 feet wide. That's awfully small considering how many Yanks went into it.
Well, that's the problem. Was it created a bottleneck because 200 feet wide, it's 70. I think it was 70 feet deep. I forget the exact dimensions, but the problem is that the soldiers went around the sides of it and didn't go in. Yeah. And Meade kept saying, send in more men. So they finally did send in. Finally did send in the USC they had really nowhere else to go because they're told to push forward. Yeah. And you had such a small area, and the Confederates also defended the flanks too. So you had no other choice but to go through. Yeah. And they went in there and they got stuck and they couldn't get out. And
Mahone said it was like a turkey shoot. And yeah, Elsie said they must have been really log jammed in there. They were. It was like Mahone says it was a turkey shoot.
I mean, just imagine trying to fight on the subway, and that's how it was. And you had people elbowed. It's like waiting in line. It's like look at Amanda. It's like trying to get on the subway after a Cubs game, freaking Wrigley. The train station. You're waiting, but to not waiting to get on, and you end up nowhere to move. So they had to go through. You see a vacant area, you go through it. Yeah, that's how it was. And they got in, and then the Confederates specifically talk about some of the Rebs under the Sanders Alabamans. They're going to come forward, and they've got a perfect shooting point, and they've got Rebs on the left, Rebs on the right, right all over them. So they really had no choice. That's why they said it was a stupendous failure. It all went to shit so quickly. This escalated quickly. Someone said.
Yeah, this escalated quickly. Yeah, it's Amanda mentions that there's a brewery in Wells, Maine has a whoopie pie beer.
Yeah, there's a place here at the Knockabout that had whoopie pie beer. They had
Lucky Charms beer.
Lucky Charms beer actually
really good.
Is shockingly good. It's a beer with
especially when they put the marshmallows in it.
And they put the marshmallows and the cereal on top of it. It doesn't really sound like it works, but it works. It just does. It's really good. But it's pretty good. But you can only imagine how this was. I mean, I couldn't imagine a worse hell than being pinned next to guys being shot one after the other because you can't move. I mean, everywhere you shot. And that's what they said there was 8 to 10 deep in bodies. Imagine stacking that up, how deep that must have been.
It's just, the thing about, we've studied 1864 a lot recently, which is funny because it's the 159th of all these battles, not the 160th, which is next year. But, and I keep coming away from each of these things thinking, holy shit, like, how do you get this much worse? You have things like, in the Western Theater, you have Pickett's Mills, which is horrible. You have other things happening in the Western Theater, too, that are just like, you have Ebenezer Creek that happens in 1864 in the March to the Sea. But then in the Eastern Theater, you have, the Crater, Spotsylvania. Cold Harbor, and every one of these battles is terrible from the fighting, how horrific it is. And that's what you read in the soldier diaries, in the memoirs as well. Well, Howard specifically is very detailed. in recounting the horrors of battle. And he did that because he has, after Gettysburg, after his chapter in Gettysburg, he wrote about how we can't glorify war for young men.
Yeah.
And he's saying that as a father, he's writing at the time after his son had been killed in the Philippines. And that's one thing that, like, I'm like, okay, this is why he's saying this, because he doesn't want young men to think that, oh, war is awesome. It's, you
No,
know,
exactly.
and
But
that's
for
why
this battle,
he's so detailed, and that it's by design.
right? But there's also one of the soldiers we didn't talk about because we just didn't. Elias Polk, he's a commander of the 14th Alabama. He gets killed by a black guy, and he's one of Sanders' guys, and it turns into a rage because one of their white officers is killed by a black soldier, and that level of anger goes into it too. So it was just a situation of pure cauldron of just piss and hate. And it's just to the point where the white soldiers are killing their black soldiers, white Union soldiers killing black Union soldiers because they don't. It's guilt by association. The hell with this. This is ridiculous. That's what this was. All because the Burnside-Ledlie order was either ignored or misinterpreted. Again, communication, terrain, weather, always the big three. This one was definitely communication. They could have used some Malort, man. That would have calmed them down.
That probably would have. I still think he was getting banged up on Malort now.
Maybe they were drinking Malort instead of rum. That would explain a lot.
That's what I said. They were probably drinking Malort. So Elsie said, which offensive did Chamberlain get his hips don't lie wound?
That was later on. That would have been later in that, because that was during the siege. But the offensive, that injury to Chamberlain, as much as we have fun with the old guy with the mustache, I wouldn't wish that on my worst friggin' enemy. No. You get shot in the hip, it goes all the way through, it slices your urethra. Okay, just imagine that. And considering how hot it was, it must have been gold bomb powder must have flown everywhere, right? And they have to probe it with a friggin' ramrod to find the bullets. And then they get the bullet out somehow. They only make him a general because I think he's going to die on the battlefield. Yeah. And they splice his urethra together with a glass tube. Ew, right? Some people say metal tube, but it's pretty sure it's a glass tube.
Yeah.
And it leaked for the rest of his life. He just smelled like piss wherever he went. And then it finally killed him in 1914. This injury. He's
considered to be one of the last Civil War veterans to die of his wounds. Frank makes a good point here, and I do agree with this, that Franklin was the culmination of the worst in 1864.
It was. The only difference was this one was more race-driven.
Yes, the Crater is the one that was worse, I think, in the racially driven fighting.
Because as much as Franklin was brutal, it was soldiers fighting soldiers. Yeah. It's fighting for the cause and all that shit.
Yeah.
But this one was an opportunity to just flat out murder people under the flag of orders. So I think this one is worse for that reason. But Franklin, what makes Franklin difficult to get your arms around too was the fact that it was such a waste because the shit was over. The game was over at that point.
Yeah.
It's like losing a quarter.
But if you read about how things are in the Western theater with Beauregard supposedly being in charge, Hood not giving a shit, and Beauregard basically being like, I don't know if your plan will work, dude, but thoughts and prayers, you do you, because you're going to do it anyway. Because I think Beauregard knew that Davis was going to give Hood permission to do it anyway. But yeah, I'm like, Franklin is one of those ones that it's like anything after Atlanta, as you always say, is just a waste. It's like, why? Like,
no, the problem with it is that the politicians didn't know it was over because they were afraid of putting their head in a noose, so they want to keep it going as long as you can. The soldiers knew it was done, but you also had some people. You mentioned E.P. Alexander. He'd still be fighting today if he had their. Same with Jubal Early. Oh, yeah. He didn't want to quit, but a lot of the guys did figure it out as time did go on. But again, the problem with all this stuff is that we're not looking at this in real time like they were.
No,
because you could sit there and say, this whole thing is falling apart. But you know what? Tom Brady came back from 28-3-1, so maybe we can't do. I know the timing doesn't work out, but that's the whole kind of concept. Was you still find that sliver, that silver lining that you could, if this happens. If we can escape Appomattox, we can connect with Joseph E. Johnson. If we can get back, it's a lot of ifs, if. But when the fear is if I don't, we're dead. You're going to do anything.
Yeah.
If you're a caged animal, if you're put in the corner, you're gonna fight or flight, and that was the whole thing, and that's why it was tough for Grant and Sherman in a lot of cases, because you're fighting against people they're fighting for their survival at that point.
Yeah,
and you're afraid they're gonna go in the mountains and they're gonna fight this guerrilla warfare.
Style. Yeah, and I mean that was the thought. Lynn said she went to the crater a few years ago, and you can see the tunnel area where it was built, but the crater itself is mostly gone, so it was hard for her to picture.
Yeah, what's neat about the crater area though is you can follow the path of the mine. You can still see it because just enough spots caved in along the way, and they're never going. And there's still, I'm sure there's still parts of the tunnel that's still there. They're never going to excavate it because why would they? But you can see the trail, how it went, and you can still see where it was. But like anything else, you look at it and it's like Plymouth Rock. Like that's it, really. But a lot of it is overgrown. But that was also a very popular place for kids to ride bikes on back in the day. People went down there. It wasn't the Park Service, American Battlefield Trust. They just bought a whole bunch of land in that area not too long ago. But the crater was private lands. Really, I mean, within 100 years ago, I think the exact date, but there were people, like I said before, who were selling bones they found from troops. You can tour the mine. But I remember I remember where the hell I saw that, but they'd be picnic people, kids would ride their bikes on there. So a lot of it's been around. That's why it's important. Why people need to stop bitching about Round Top, by the way. I'm going to tie this together. Okay. If you want the Round Top look like a crater in 50 years, then do nothing. But if you wanted
to tired of the people bitching about Round Top being open. People saying, "Oh, I can't go to Gettysburg because Round Top's not open." There's plenty to explore. There's more than just Round Top. But it's this whole thing that people do not like. It's restoration work. It takes time. It takes money. You need to get funding for it. They have a timeline, and they can't rush it because they can't screw it up. And some of these Gettysburg pages, I hate to say it, but it seems like people just find something to complain about each week.
Oh, hey, John, see you later. John's heading out. See you, John. Yeah, go Braves.
It's really, but restoration work has to happen at all these battlefields, or they're not going to exist, or we're going to end up where our friend Jim Miller lives. He lives in Murfreesboro. There's not much left of Stones River.
Well, I mean, right. Well, I mean, Gettysburg, it's, we haven't really talked much about Gettysburg, so here we go. But in the last 10 years, you could see how much that terrain has changed.
Yeah.
And really, since the movie came out, I mean, some of those rocks are like walking on ice now. It's slippery.
Yeah.
The tread's all gone off the paths. There's all new paths that are forming because people cut around. But if they don't do anything, they're going to permanently close that, and you're going to have to look at it from afar. And then
it's going to be too dangerous for people to go on.
And people are bitching that they're putting up a wall where the buses can park because that's not historically accurate.
But if they don't, then there's going to be more erosion. They have to make a retaining wall because of the vibration from the vehicles. It causes erosion. Frank's wondering when it's going to be open, and he said, "I understand that it takes time to perfect the Buster statue." They
don't know for sure. I mean, the thing about it, they are working at it. But
I think they've extended. LC probably knows because he usually follows that stuff quite a bit. But I think, I think it's taking a little bit longer. Which, I mean, as someone who's worked in that field before with conservation restoration, you can give estimates on how long something is going to take, but you can get held up by different things: weather, funding, supplies. Just like in the Civil War, shit happens,
Yeah, no. So I mean, again, it's you have to do it. I mean, people don't realize, Sykes Avenue did not exist at the Battle of Gettysburg. The line of the 20th Main were connected with the left of the 83rd PA would be right in the middle of that street. So the marker's not accurate. People don't complain about that. You have to understand that you can't have it be historic Williamsburg. You have to have it functional for people to visit. And if you're going to have the most popular area, which is Little Round Top, and you want that to be sustained for future generations, you have to sometimes call a timeout and then fix it. Yeah. And the people bitching, you know what? Go see Culp's Hill. Go to other parts. Go outside of the area. Go spend more time on Oak Hill, because the constant complaining, whining on Facebook, and on the Park Service, they're doing. Trust me,
they're doing their job. We would not be Gettysburg.
In a perfect world, Little Round Top would never have to be dealt with, but it's not a perfect world. You have to deal with it. So before you start complaining to Steve Sims or complaining about this and that, or going, bitching at Rangers or doing all this stuff, just they're doing it as fast as they can. So just sit back and, and I bet you'll enjoy it when you go back. So before you criticize it, wait to go back and see what it looks like. The people who think that it's destroying history. It's like, come on, man, just whatever,
Yeah, and to the other thing as well is like maybe get out of Gettysburg as well. If you're going to be in that area, go to Monocacy, go to Lee's Retreat. There's so much more to it than just like Gettysburg. Monocacy is one of my favorite battlefields to visit. You can see where Order 191 was found, but you can also see, where Lew Wallace fought, and basically, the battle that saved Washington, D.C. Lynn mentions that there are displays at the crater showing tourists in the late 1800s, which you had talked about.
Yeah.
Seeing that picture there too. But yeah, there's been a lot lately, because the Park Service is really good about posting updates about Round Top. They're being very open and transparent about what's going on there. But then if you go and look at the comments, people are like, oh my God, it's so closed. Oh my God, it looks terrible. It's not done yet.
Well, how do you know what it looks like unless you've been there? And they post some pictures and you can't tell it. I'm going to guess is when people actually finally get up there again and look, they're going to be like, okay, this is cool. I can live with this. It's fine. And then it's done. You never in your lifetime will ever have to close a little Round Top again. Nope. This is it. So.
Yeah. And they have to do that at all battlefields. They do it at all battlefields. You just hear more bitching and complaining about Gettysburg because it's so popular, but they have to do shit like this at Chickamauga. They do at Chickamauga. One thing they have to do is controlled burns to keep it looking as close to how it did during the battle. They have to do this stuff. Mm-hmm. Franklin is one example, Battle of Franklin Trust. They purchased that Pizza Hut because for some reason, Pizza Hut is where everybody dies.
Yes, somebody who owns the Pizza Hut people, they know where all the historical hotspots are in these battlefields. There's no question about that.
Yep. Glojam mentions the little Round Top erosion was to the point where it needed attention. Exactly, and that's what people don't understand. You try and talk to them about erosion and restoration work, and they're like, "I want it to look like it did in 1863." How do you?
But it didn't
like
though. My favorite. I hope they didn't take down any witness trees. Like the National Park Service is not going to take down historical. The witness trees that are near Patty O'Rourke's charge down the hill, they're still there. They're not going to take those down. They just need to make it safe and to make it accessible. And for the people who are complaining that handicap accessible, it's that's ridiculous. I'm sorry.
That is. I'm sorry, but like, don't.
I mean, you could sit there and say, I want to be able to see it, but I shouldn't have to see an extra ramp so people in wheelchairs feel that's not accurate. It's like, dude, I mean, I don't know. People, it's a weird planet sometimes with this. But,
it is. It's like, well, like I said, like I said to you and some of our friends one time, I'm like, well, what's going to be the thing that we complain about this week with Gettysburg? What is the Park Service doing wrong? Who's going to take a picture of a fence where they're trying to get the vegetation to grow back and they put the fence up so people don't walk over it? Like,
yeah,
I call them keyboard complainers. Yes, that's exactly it.
I mean, there are a few, but some of their complaints may in their minds be justified. Some are not. It comes down to pure selfishness though. They want what they want when they want it. But hey, something, maybe sit back. I think it might be okay when it's all said and done. And then I think it'll be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Everyone survived the Devil's Den thing. I mean, they survived.
There's still people that complain about it, but I went up there and I like it. It's easier to get up into Devil's Den, and they do have the fence around it right now, but they're trying to grow the vegetation back again. They have to put the fence up. That's the thing, is like restoration work. It's not going to look great for a while, but when it's all done, it's going to be worth it. It's like somebody was bitching about the new tour bus building because they don't have the siding on it yet and it's all yellow, and they're like, oh my God, look what an eyesore.
I mean, people don't realize that, back in the day when we're not talking too long ago, there was an airport runway on the first day's battlefields. You had advertisements on Forbes Rock. You had basically an amusement park behind Little Round Top. You had a train that ran right through Devil's Den. You could still see the path. I mean, the park has done what they can to kind of go back to what it was. Yeah. But there was a lot of stuff that people be mortified now. And I know there was that big thing a couple of years ago. They were going to build a casino nearby and everyone was freaking out about that. But stuff like that is going to be stopped. It's going to be shut down. But I think, I don't obviously work for the Park Service, but I think in their heart, they're doing whatever they can to sustain. They took down the tower in the 90s that was up there. So they are doing what they can, but you can't have it all. I mean,
No.
51% of Gettysburg is tax exempt. When you're talking schools, museums, the battlefield, it's still a functioning town. It's the county seat for Adams County.
Yeah.
You have to be able to have some sort of economic, be able to sustain itself economically. So you can't take down neighborhoods and buildings and make it look like it did in the, in the Matthew Brady pictures, because you still have to survive as a town. Not
Yeah.
every, and for every 5 people in Gettysburg, 1 give a shit about the battle. Most don't.
Exactly. Well, that's
because-
how it is when you grow up. You don't ever explore the history in your backyard. You never do. Admittedly, that's why I don't know. You've asked me questions about the history of Goderich and where I grew up, and I've had to go look shit up. Like I don't know the history of my own town, because you're there. Why would you bother, right? I would imagine it's the same. Like, we live in one of the most historical towns in America, Plymouth.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you a lot of the residents here don't know.
No, nobody cares. I mean, I grew up in Boston. I didn't care about the Rev War just because it's everywhere.
Yeah, and the one war in Canada that was like 1812. I don't know much about that at all. I know a little bit about World War I and World War II, but 1812, nope. MJ mentions Colonel Ireland's greater than Chamberlain. Colonel Ireland needs more people championing for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lynn said Culp's Hill is so underrated and interesting. Same type of charge as Chamberlain, but it's just not as well known, and that's very, very true. Like, Culp's Hill is probably my favorite place in the battlefield now, because I am, after the 11th Corps, I love the 12th Corps. And you know why? It's because they go out to the Western Theater. They are all over the place. There's some really cool monuments out there that they list the battles in the Eastern and Western Theater they're part of, and that's such an interesting thing. Like, Colonel Ireland is the same, with that. Like, he goes out to the Western Theater. He fights against Pat Claiborne, which is the best the Confederates had. Fights against him at Ringgold Gap. We went and saw that monument. We were probably the only people that had visited that in a really long time, because it's out by like where Ringgold Gap has its like kind of the town works is out there. So they got like all their dump trucks and stuff out there. And there's this monument to David Ireland and the men he commanded. Sadly, he passes away in Atlanta. And there's a picture of him, and it's really eerie, the picture. He's standing outside what was Hood's headquarters, and he made it his headquarters in Atlanta. And that is the last picture ever taken of David Ireland. And odds are he was starting to feel the symptoms of what he died from in that picture.
Yeah.
And that's it's a haunting picture when you realize it's his last one.
No, it's the Ireland one's tough. That whole story, but we talked a lot about that. But this is it's amazing to think that somebody could fight as hard as he did to be taken down by disease. But that was the most common thing. It really was,
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, is it Glow Jim, from information available, they found a path for wheelchair access that followed topography and eliminated one that might have been disruptive. That's regarding Little Round Top. That's really good to know that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So they're doing their best to preserve it, but also make it accessible. And that's what matters, is the accessibility. So maybe someone that couldn't get to Little Round Top before, maybe they can now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what matters.
No, I mean, that's the thing, is if people really care about sustaining this stuff, you have to do it. I mean, and it happens everywhere. I mean, I think people seem to think that Gettysburg, Pennsylvania is the only battlefield in the world that has to be sustained. I mean, they all, like you said, they all do.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, I mean, for the Gettysburg people, you're lucky you have a Gettysburg, because I think about Ski living down there in Fredericksburg, and there ain't much left of Fredericksburg.
There's not any.
Slaughter Farm, Prospect Hill, that is, but Maurice Heights. I mean, people go to Maurice Heights, and it's a famous area. The Irish Brigade, the whole deal. But you have a wall, you have about 100 feet of grass, and it's all houses and neighborhoods going down the hill, and it's sad. It's sad, but you take advantage of what you can.
Exactly, and it's and you've been to Chickamauga now. Now, admittedly, we have to go back when it's not raining, so you can see more of it. But there's still a lot. You can get a sense of what happened at that battle because it's so well preserved. Chickamauga is the first national battlefield park before Gettysburg, and they're quite proud of that, and I understand why. And I mean, I've told this story before in the live, but I walked into Chickamauga, my first visit there, I had on a Gettysburg hoodie. And the ranger was like, oh no, we're not doing
Uh,
this. He was just being sarcastic. But he and I talked for quite a bit. And he told me that, when Gettysburg opened after Chickamauga, Chickamauga lost a lot of its cannons to go to
Mhm.
Gettysburg. So a lot of the cannons that you see at Gettysburg originally were at Chickamauga National Military Park, but they took them for Gettysburg. And I've always found that so interesting that, so I'm looking at cannons that were once at Chickamauga because they had and you've seen Chickamauga, it's got a
Mhm.
shit ton of cannons.
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, obviously, it doesn't have the statuary that Gettysburg has the largest outdoor
Yeah.
statuary in probably the entire world, probably.
But that's one
We're
thing I love about Chickamauga.
Yeah, Chickamauga, for the most part, it doesn't have as much. Now, Chickamauga is very well interpreted. It's very different. It's kind of like a really big version of Chancellorsville.
Yeah.
With less wooded, but still kind of that thing. But Chickamauga is cool. That's if anybody is looking for a Civil War nerd vacation, go out to Chattanooga because you can, like what we did. We went to Atlanta. We went to Andersonville. We went to Pickett's Mill. We went to Ringle Gap, Chickamauga, Chattanooga,
Jonesboro.
and every bar in between. To be honest,
Lookout Mountain.
Jonesboro, Lookout Mountain. Went to all of them. But that's a place where there's a lot of stuff. You can follow that highway from Atlanta to Chattanooga, and it's seemingly every exit is a battlefield. And you go to the museum, go see the general. We didn't get a chance to do that.
No, we're gonna do that next time because we're definitely going back. But Pickett's Mill is this like hidden gem of Civil War battlefields, and they're so proud of it. They love it. It's one of the best preserved battlefields. And it was one where it's like you go there and you're like, I came away like, what the hell? Like, you go see Kennesaw as well, which is an amazing battle.
Yeah, I forgot what Kennesaw. Kennesaw is one of my favorites because it's just, seeing Cheatham's Hill. It's an amazing place. I mean, Kennesaw Mountain itself, big Kennesaw. It's got the view that overlooks. You can see Atlanta. You can see Stone Mountain.
Yeah,
not a lot happened there because there was cannon up there, but not a lot. It's that Pigeon Hill area in Cheatham's Hill where most of the fighting took place. New Hope Church, places like that. But it's pristine because frankly, not a lot of people go up there. You can do it. There's a walking path that you can take really from the visitor center. You walk up the hill. You can drive it to a certain point, but when you walk up, you get the very top of big Kennesaw Mountain. You can see those entrenchments. But I'm telling you that the breastworks down by Cheatham's Hill, down by where that Union soldiers' grave
those are
is,
amazing.
because it's like, and I'm sure there've been other battlefields too, but they're preserved. And what's amazing about them is the multi levels.
Yeah.
And so it's like looking at like stadium seating, like grass stadium seating,
Yeah.
and they built these things up. And how brave you'd have to be to get your ass even close to those, because it's just, that's why that soldier grave is. I bet you that's why they left him there.
Yeah, that's balls right there. Like there's an unknown Union soldier buried up there, and he made it into the past the third level, which is like holy shit.
This would be like if a soldier who did Pickett's charge was killed at Meade's house.
Yeah.
And he's all about how this guy did this and how you got all the way back there. And if you walk the area and you visit the site and you see it and you see what he had to get through to get to that spot, it's like friggin' Rambo. Yeah. They finally got him and they buried him on the spot, and they just decided to leave him here, made him an unknown soldier. They have a nice little grave. We were there in April, but you could still see people had decorated the nearby tree with Christmas decorations, and it's kind of like a cemetery, like a memorial. It's really cool. It is places like that you can visit that are really, really neat.
Yeah, but yeah, Chickamauga next to Gettysburg they're tied for, like, those two are tied for first for my favorite battles, because I mean, admittedly, I am more Western theater. I love the Western theater. But Chickamauga is, Gettysburg and it are two that you have to see, because Chickamauga is, one of the bigger battles in the Civil War. It leads, it's probably Bragg's biggest fumble, because he's in a great position at the end and he doesn't do anything about it at all. It leads to a siege. Chickamauga is why Rosecrans ends up getting basically fired. And you have some of the mounted infantry fighting there. Minty and Wilder, I will always say, is some of the most fascinating in the Civil War, because it's not talked about enough. And Wittenberg wrote a book about it called anyway, he wrote a book about Minty and Wilder. I have it. It's called Holding the Line on the River of Death. And in it, he says that the fighting that they did basically saved Rosecrans's ass and the Army of the Cumberland. If Minty and Wilder don't do what they did on September the 18th, Rosecrans's Army of the Cumberland probably would have been annihilated.
Yeah, there's no question. There's no
And
question.
that's when you, and that's why, there's still some groups that say Chickamauga was just 2 days. I say it's 3 days because of the fighting that happened there. And I'd never been down to Alexander's Bridge before until I went with you. And that was amazing to go down there to see. And that's where John T. Wilder was with his Lightning Brigade. And then we got to see his grave. And it is the most nondescript grave.
Yeah, he doesn't say any. It just looks like someone you see.
Like,
yeah, he was a big, historical guy, obviously, but he very, but there's a lot of the people we talked about in the Crater episode. We've talked a lot about these people. Everybody knows the big names, Ledley and Mahone, but there's a lot of other guys. David Weisiger, no one talks about. Obviously, Colonel John Sanders, no one talks about. On the Union side of the USCT guys, Henry Goddard Thomas, Joshua Siegfried. These are not household names, but these are people who deserve just as much attention because of what they did. And you could only imagine some of these guys in Ferrero's group, just because you didn't have much artillery support. Fort Morton, where the headquarters was just east of it, had 14 guns. You had Albert Monroe's artillery, but you had no cavalry, so you really had just mano a mano fighting in this hole that you couldn't get through. You were stuck in, thrown in this racial hatred thrown on top of it. With this miscommunication of not knowing where they're supposed to go. And again, orders get screwed up, people get killed. And this is a perfect example of it. So definitely, we're going to jump off here in a second, but definitely study the Crater and look at the stories. I mean, it's interesting and it's fun when you look at the big picture. When you get down to the nitty gritty, you realize how brutal this really was. And people don't think about the Crater. You don't think about July 30th, 1864 with the real vicious days in American history. You think of September 1762. You think of July 3rd, 1863. But you don't think specifically of this one. And when you look at it, some of these brigades, 31% casualties. I mean, these are people who just shot down and killed for who they were.
Yeah, it's such a horrific battle. And then getting back to Gettysburg, Mike mentions there's more to see at Gettysburg than Little Round Top, which we completely agree. So if you're truly interested in the history of the battle, you can find a lot of cool places that are not visited often. Like, what's that one place where, remember, LC messaged us and he said Park Ranger came to check on me because no one goes here?
Well, that's the thing. If you get
Benner's Hill.
Benner's Hill, no one ever goes to Benner's Hill, and that's a cool little place out there. Latimer's guys out there, but you go behind the 20th Indiana Monument. You go find Henry Fuller's monument, Rose notwithstanding, Rose was cut. But those are the places you can go. I love, one of my favorite places in Gettysburg is you park the car, right where Wheeler was killed, and you walk behind that hill down the 20th Main. And if you 20th Indiana, and if you walk down there and you go in the fall or the winter, you can get down there without the bugs and without those little sticky friggin' things. But you can see when you talk about some of the soldier stories by some of those Arkansas guys, and trying to fight up that slope, and they talk about this little pitch, this little area, like a little valley. And they talk about it, and you can see exactly what they're talking about. And there's no monuments or anything. So you have to, unlike a lot of parts of Gettysburg, it's completely the same, and you can see exactly what they saw. And it's just, and that's what's cool about it is that's why, as much as Round Top is closed, it sucks, and Devil's Den, there are so many cool places just if you really study the battle, to discover and go find. And that's why the diaries are important, because they talk about these places. And you don't read about these places in Trudeau or Cottington. Or
and these are the places that were, important to the soldiers that were fighting there. That's what they saw as the most important place. Elsie said, it's all psychological. You yell Vicksburg, everyone says, huh, what? You yell Gettysburg, we've got a panic on our hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Shout out to MJ, though, too. This is another movie reference. But you got me a really awesome birthday gift. So for years, I've been talking about, I love Major League, one of my top 5 movies, and so is Gettysburg. The common thread between the two is Tom Berenger playing Jake Taylor in Major League, and Longstreet in Gettysburg. And I've talked for years about getting a Cleveland Indians jersey. And yes, I realize they're not called the Guardians, but when Major League came out, they were the Indians. I've talked about getting an Indians jersey that is Longstreet with the number 63. And that's what you got me for my birthday, which is really, really awesome. Well, I posted it, and then MJ said, and I'll never not think this about Dorn, but she said Dorn, one of the characters in Major League, is totally Dan Sickles.
Oh yeah, there's no question about that. It definitely is.
And that's all I think about now. It's just that like Dorn being Dan Sickles.
No, you got problems. You got problems. All right.
Hey.
Well, I know. All right. Why don't we jump off here? We got stuff we got to do today. So we have many miles to go before we sleep today. It's going to be a long day and a long night tonight. So, yeah. So
and we're out of beer.
I mean, yeah, our beer, Mary's low beer light's going off right now. So we got to go solve that. So we're going to, no episode next week, no live next weekend because
we're taking the weekend off. We're both going to be away. We both have stuff going on, but we will be back hopefully the weekend after, maybe not with a new episode. We got to sit down and come up with some more episodes.
There's a lot of stuff. We still want to, obviously that some great things to talk about. And a lot of stories that still need to be told. But yeah, we are like a year ahead. It's funny we're doing all these 1864 stuff. But again, it's important because we wanted to spend more time on the Overland campaign in Petersburg. So we really hadn't.
Yeah. And we had just visited a lot of the sites on the Atlanta campaign. Right. I mean, the other battle we have to talk about sometime is Jonesboro, where we saw the Claiborne.
Yeah, no, there's no questions. There's a lot of that stuff. So watch the spot. We have. We're going to be scheduling the book club with Tom Huntington, Maine at Gettysburg. We're going to be
confirming the rest of our dates for right. We have 3 books left in the book club this year.
We have to do that. We got to confirm the one with the Claiborne book, Craig Simmons, and then Lisa Samia is going to be coming up at the end of the year. She's going to be coming out of the bullpen to finish off 2023 the book club. So we're going to be doing a handful, jammed into a couple months here, but last couple months has been very, very busy.
It's been June, July, and August. We're basically just because we're involved with baseball. It's been pretty crazy for us. So anyway, thank you everybody for coming on here for this.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to talk about this stuff. And I think it's great to talk about some people who maybe are not household names who deserve their stories to be told, because one more quick story about Sanders, which is he gives one of the better emotional speeches to his Alabamans. He's part of that second counter attack on the crater, and by then Robert E. Lee and Beauregard are nearby and they're watching. And Sanders points to Lee and says, "If we fail, Robert E. Lee said he himself will lead the next assault. We cannot risk his life. We have." And it's a cool story he talks about and stuff like that. So anyway, so go board. We're gonna do our best, MJ. We better.
And thank you for all you do in the Civil War community, MJ, and thank you for everybody on here for supporting us. We are actually, I think it's a week from Tuesday is our 1-year anniversary of when we released our first episode. I think
1 year,
or a couple. No, sorry, 3 years. 3 years.
It's been a lot of years. So I've been 3 years.
Yeah,
so
3 years.
anyway, so go out there, get out there, see your battlefields, read your books, enjoy it, have fun with it. Be nice to your fellow creatures. It's tough. It's a tough world out there. So everybody do your best. So all right, Mary, we'll talk to you a little bit. We got some stuff planned. So everybody have a great rest of the weekend, and we will look forward to talking to you all soon. So yeah, we're off next weekend. So we'll definitely appreciate that. So we'll be doing some separate shenanigans this time. Your ass is going back to Canada.
I'm not going to be getting shenanigans in my hometown. I can tell you that. It's going to be a weekend of like reading and probably doing podcast admin stuff.
That's okay. You got to do what you got to go visit the fam. So it's okay. But I'll be doing other things as well. All right, guys. Have a great rest of the weekend. We'll talk